All right. Hey, hello everyone. I am here today with Tracy Kennedy. Tracy runs a coaching and consulting practice in the Los Angeles area. I'll let her give you the specific part of LA that she lives in, although she's originally from Oregon. And Tracy is a Cloverleaf coach, and I'll let her talk a little bit more about some of the things that are her specialty areas. But one of those, and part of the reason why I've included Tracy today in this video series is because she has a focus on personal development and growth. And one of the things that is near and dear to her is self-discipline, which is what we're talking about today. And I'm just going to let her give a quick intro, and then let's just jump into what are some ways that people can think about creating a bit more self-discipline in their life.
Awesome. Thanks, Darren. I'm excited to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So I live in Topanga Canyon. It's a little town in the Santa Monica Mountains outside of LA. So being from Oregon, I had to go somewhere green when I moved to LA. So I'm excited to be there. My coaching practice, if I summed it up, I mean, it's really my goal as a coach and consultant is to get people from where they are now to where they want to be and to overcome any obstacles along the way, right? And put simply, that's kind of my goal and mission. Now the obstacles, and this is why self-discipline is really a fun topic to talk about, because the obstacles could include confidence, it could include belief systems, it could include skill sets, and it can include discipline, right? And I don't think people usually come to me saying, I want to be more disciplined, right? That's not something people usually go, I need self-discipline. Do they? I don't hear that a lot. But they say things like, how do I stop procrastinating? Or how do I get started on this? Or how do I follow through? Or how do I stay focused? Or how do I, be more productive? Like that's really what they're saying when they're looking for things around self-discipline. So That's why I'm excited to be here to talk about self-discipline.
No, that's perfect. And one of the last video series we did was about mindset. And I think this is a good follow-up to that because, obviously you got to create disciplines in your life in order to kind of like get past obstacles and, advance towards some of the goals and objectives you have for your life. So let's just jump in. What's the first area that we should be thinking about?
Okay, so I'm going to give you around 10 areas to think about. But before I do, I want people to think about something. So this is the coach in me. So if you just sit back and listen to this, right, if somebody's listening, they're not going to get that much value. They'll get some. But learning to be effective needs to be relevant, needs to be timely, and needs to be personally meaningful. So I would just ask people to take a moment and pause and think about an area of their life where if they were more disciplined, if they could follow through better, if they could get started on something, it would have a significant impact. So that when we go through these, you have that in mind so that it can be more effective and useful as opposed to just information coming in.
Yeah, I love that. And obviously that's a key perspective that Cloverleaf has because our focus is providing coaching tips and insights where people are working that is contextually relevant and gives people an opportunity to practice it on a regular basis, to actually make it a part of their routines, right? And that's part of what discipline is all about. And so totally, if you're watching this, take the time, pause it and write down maybe what one thing that you want to think about making an advance or growing in your personal life.
Perfect. Awesome. And like with everything, I'm giving you a couple options because as you know, at Cloverleaf, there's no one size fits all approach, right? We're all wired differently. We have different values or beliefs or characteristics or motivations. And if we can tap into those and give you some options, then you have more likelihood of making something work. When anyone says, this is the one thing you should do, I'm always cautious because it's different for everyone, isn't it? You know that better than anyone.
That's right.
Awesome. Okay, let's dive in. So the first strategy I would give for self-discipline is really get motivated. So I believe that motivation precedes discipline, right? And if you think about the word motive, motivation, it comes from the root word motive, like why are you doing something? And I feel like oftentimes people are like beating themselves up for not being disciplined, but they're trying to do things that they don't even really want to do, right? And I find that one of the keys to being more disciplined is to get motivated. Like, what's your motivation? What's the underlying drive or importance of what you're doing? And I love this quote by Jim Rohn, right? Because it's discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishments. And if you understand your goal and know what's important to you, then it's much easier to get motivated than it is because somebody told you to do something.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I was actually on a walk with my wife this morning, and we were talking about, actually quarantine and COVID has been good for me because it's created these places where I can actually be more physically active. And so one of those is morning walks, and then also walks when I'm taking phone calls. So if I don't need a computer in front of me, then I just toss my AirPods in and then go for a walk. And we were having this conversation because I've lost 20 pounds in the midst of this, and I have a goal to lose another 10 to 15 over the course of this. And I was like, hey, I feel like I've flatlined a little bit. Like I had such a good kind of start to it, and it's just kind of like, flatlined. And she basically was like, yeah, well, I think you're going to need to like implement some additional, things than just like going for walks in the morning, or like adding a few extra calls per day on your walk. And I was like, yeah, I'm just not sure I want it that badly yet.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I think that's really what we're talking about here is like, how motivated are you to actually implement a couple of additional changes to get that extra 15 pounds?
Totally. And so it goes to, if there's something that you're finding yourself struggling to follow through on, is really stop and say, what's my motivation here? How can I tap into? And I have an example with exercise too, Darren. So yoga, right? I've been doing yoga for 25 years, but still to drag, and my goal, my commitment is to do 1 day a week, no matter what, right? But to drag myself that 1 day a week to the yoga studio for a 90-minute class is always painful. Like, it requires so much discipline. And the only way I make myself do it is I remember, okay, when I do this, I feel better. I'm a better mom. I'm a better parent. I'm a better parent. I'm a better employee. I get more work done. I'm more grounded. I'm more happy. I'm less reactive. And so that motivates me to do the yoga, right? I don't really want to do yoga, but it really motivates me to go do it. Otherwise, yeah, I would not do it at all.
That's awesome. What's number 2?
All right, number 2. Remove temptation. So this one I think is so fun because I think so often, again, we beat ourselves up, but we put ourselves in an environment where it's impossible to be self-disciplined, right? And so, well, I'll give you an example. So I did some health coaching for a while, and I worked with a client, and she was really frustrated with herself because she was trying to do intermittent fasting and finish eating at 8 and eat really healthfully, right? And she wasn't following through on that. So she was eating after 8. And I said, well, tell me what happens after 8 in your home. And she said, well, my partner really loves, it's always been our tradition. We sit down and watch TV together from like 9 until we go to bed. And what do you do when you watch TV? Well, my partner usually has ice cream or potato chips.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Right? And she's beating herself up for not being self-disciplined. And I'm thinking, your environment is making it so hard. And there was research done at Cornell University, actually. And it found that, have you heard this research? I
have not, no.
Okay. About how our environment affects our choices, right? Like, our environment really has an impact. So basically, women who kept soft drinks on the counter weighed 24 to 26 pounds more than those who didn't. Those with a box of cereal weighed an average of 20 pounds more. And those who had fruit on the counter weighed 13 pounds less.
That's incredible.
Right? So instead of like beating ourselves up for, like, if you want to eat better, don't buy the junk food when you're at the store. If you want to finish a big project at work, but you're getting distracted, like, don't stay in a group environment. Go into a conference room or turn your phone off or your DM off or your Slack off or whatever it is. But our environment can be so much stronger than our willpower. And you just want to make sure your environment's conducive to your goals, because willpower is a limited, finite resource. And if we're trying to constantly fight against the grain, it's going to be really hard to stay disciplined with something.
Yeah. Why put extra obstacles in your path? So yeah, just remove them altogether. Cool.
Yeah.
What's number 3?
All right. Number 3. This one relates a little bit to what you were speaking about. Create a challenge, goal, or deadline, right? This is why every blogger, influencer, whatever it is, has a 5-day, a 10-day, a 30-day challenge, because a challenge actually works, right? It gives you something to work for. It shifts your motivation. It shifts your lifestyle for a period of time. And because it's finite, it's a little bit easier to grab onto. So I would recommend anyone who's struggling with self-discipline, set a goal, a challenge, or a deadline. Like, think about people who want to run a marathon, right? or who want to get in shape. Instead of saying, oh, I'm going to run 5 miles a day and there's no goal, if they say, I'm going to run a half marathon, most of them start training and doing what they said they're going to do because they have that end game they're looking for.
Yeah, and the other nice thing about that example too, oftentimes I see, the date, like actually committing to the half marathon or the marathon or whatever the race is, triathlon, having that date on the calendar, you can work backwards from that, right? But if you don't have that end goal in mind, and oftentimes I find that having it be time bound is really important for me too, because if I just put the goal or the expectation out there, then it's easy for me to just shift it. It's easy for me to just move it. So yeah, totally relate to that. And you even put a clock on here. So like maybe there was some subliminal messaging there that you planted in my brain.
Completely. And that's exactly true, right? What's the time? But with time, you also have, so we'll jump to the next one, which is accountability, right? So I put phone a friend here as a strategy for self-discipline. And we know this, research has proven when you have an accountability partner or when you have someone you're accountable to, or you have that deadline, you're more likely to stay on top of things. So that's why people hire trainers to do fitness goals or nutritionists to help them eat or coaches to help. I have people call me all the time who say, I just need someone to help me stay on track and be accountable for this, right?
Yeah.
And that builds, it doesn't mean they need someone forever, but it builds a level of habit and discipline that then becomes more ingrained and they can go do it on their own.
Yeah, the interesting thing, so one of the core values of Cloverleaf is relationships matter. And that, you can only accomplish so much on your own, but if you do that with other people, and there's power in that. I was recently listening to, my favorite podcast is How I Built This. Guy Raz is an incredible interviewer. You should go check it out if you haven't listened to that podcast, subscribe to it. And he was talking with the founder of Fitbit. And, really, if you think about Fitbit, and, maybe they're a little bit less relevant today because of Apple Watch and some of the other tools on the market. But, they really kind of pioneered the whole wearables and, like biometric kind of measurement space. And, the interesting thing, listening to that interview is like they didn't really create anything that earth shattering in terms of technology. The ability to measure movement and activity has existed for 100 years. But it was really the fact that they took that data measurement and they allowed you to connect that with other people, friends, and it created this challenge of like, how many steps did you get in today? And like, this conversation point and this kind of the push and the accountability of that was really what kind of catapulted them into a multi-billion-dollar valuation. So totally relevant, I think, in terms of engaging with other people, and having that accountability is definitely super important.
Yeah, that's a great widespread example too, right? About what it's done for their business because of how many people need it. People need accountability. We're so busy. There's so much going on. People need it. You don't always want it, but you need it.
Yeah, totally. All right. What do you got next?
All right. Start small. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So I love this because change is hard and our brains are like hardwired to return to what feels comfortable, what feels predictable, what we know, right? And big changes can be really hard. So if you start small, you can build momentum, right? And action creates further action, momentum creates further momentum, progress creates more progress. So it's one of those things, if you want to start walking 5 days a week, right? Start for like 5 minutes a day and then start for 10 minutes a day and keep going. And your brain goes, oh, I can do this. I can do this. But if you go out guns blazing, trying to make a huge shift, oftentimes your mind just goes, no, it's too much. And it's hard to make that shift. So these little small changes make a big difference, and small changes eventually lead to big results, right?
Yeah, no, this is a good one for our team because when you're building a technology product, right? Like if you're always just thinking about the vision, so we have some members of our team, and I think this is a very natural kind of mindset to have, where it's like, you talk about a vision and you start down the path with that vision. And sometimes you get to that first step and some people are like, yeah, but it's not the vision. And it's less about did we get there today?
Yes.
Right? It's about just starting the process, because now you actually have something that you can measure. You can look back and say like, okay, what would we do different? How do we want to think about the next step of the journey? Now that we've taken the first one, we've seen how people reacted to it. How did they use it? We can do A/B test on that and decide like what's the next step to take. And so I think that's even relevant in terms of like how we think about product development at our company. But it's really applicable for everything that we do. And I think that whole like small, agile kind of mindset
Yes.
that a lot of corporations are adopting is very much in line with this, because it's like you don't have to get there. If you're thinking about a large system implementation, like that's going to be 2 years, and like just do what you can do today, right? And let's get that done, and then we can respond and react from there. So I love that.
Yeah. And it's so my grandfather, you love this quote based on what you said. My grandfather always said a path leads to a path, right? And it's true, but like you have to start walking first. And so often we want to like see the whole thing in front of us, but it doesn't appear until you start stepping.
Yeah.
So I love that in terms of the vision piece, right? Like you can see the vision, but you got to start walking. And in self-discipline, right? In the discipline side, it's like one of those things there, when something seems too enormous, people don't know how to start, right? And so then they just beat themselves up for not doing anything at all when it's really incremental steps that help.
Yep. I love it.
I love your example. Awesome. You're going to like this one. This kind of goes back a little bit to motivation, but like we're all motivated in different ways. And are you compelled by the satisfaction of a reward or the risk of punishment, or both, right? Like, so when you think about self-discipline, are you more disciplined because you have this big exciting goal ahead of you, or are you more disciplined when there's this risk that you're trying to avoid? And it's funny because I have identical twin girls, right? And we were talking about self-discipline, and one of them said to me, well, I'm more disciplined when I have a big goal of something really exciting. Like she's a gymnast, a competitive gymnast. And she's like, the reason I miss family vacations and don't go to any of my friend's birthday party is because, and she's so disciplined, is because of this big goal she has to win, right? And to do well in her competition. So that keeps her disciplined. And her twin sister was like, oh, I'm really motivated by not losing. And I was like, what do you mean? And she goes, well, with my class, like she's doing her classwork right now, she's like, her stronger motivation is I don't want to fail at that. So it's not so much about winning, but I don't want to fail. And so she's like, get straight A's because she doesn't want to fail, not because she wants straight A's. Does that make sense? So it's just finding your motivation. Is it more about success, or, where is it? Is it the carrot or the stick? What's going to get you going?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think like there have been times in my life when, like, if I just come back to the health example and exercise, where I've been very much motivated by the reward side of that. But like, as I'm moving into my 40s now, I'm starting to think about like flexibility and movement and mobility, and it's like I'm way more motivated now by being able to move later in life and not being hobbled or debilitated physically. And so like to some degree it's kind of shifted from being way more of the carrot aspect and the reward to avoiding potential inability to engage either with my children or my grandchildren in the future. So I'm way more motivated by the stick than I think I've ever been, in at least in that area of my life.
No, I find that interesting with health, because I find that with a lot of people, again, I spent some time doing some health coaching, and you find that, if people weren't exercising or weren't doing what they wanted to do or weren't eating a certain way, rather than going what you want, I want to look better or feel healthier, people often were more motivated by the stick of like, what does this look like in 5 years if you continue this path? What does it look like if you're not exercising or not eating well? And people were like, oh man, okay, I can do that. That was much more. So you're not the only one.
Yeah, good.
Awesome. So this will be aligned very much with Cloverleaf's philosophy, I think, right? So we all know this saying, a leopard doesn't change its spots. Or stop going against the grain, stop swimming. I looked for a salmon swimming upstream, couldn't find that. But the point here is like, maybe you're trying to be disciplined about something that simply doesn't work for how you're wired, right? So for example, if you always wait until the last minute to get stuff done, and you're beating yourself up because I'm not more disciplined, I should do it a week at a time, and I should, have broken that out, and I shouldn't wait to the last minute, and you're beating yourself up for procrastinating or not being disciplined enough. But the way that you're wired means that you do your best work at the last minute, and you think best. You probably relate to this, right, Darren? In the 11th hour, then it's really hard because you're beating your, or if like say in many entrepreneurs who beat themselves up for not doing the paperwork, right? And it's like, they're saying, I'm not disciplined enough to do this. And I'm like, no, it's just not your strength. So let's hire someone to do the paperwork. Let's wait to the last minute if it works for you. Let's like find the things that are, you think you're beating yourself up, that you're not being disciplined, and identify, is this really just against my grain? And it's better to use somebody else's strengths. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's immediately where my head jumped to, was the positive psychology kind of strengths section of this space, because really what it says is like, lean into your strengths, right? Like don't spend an inordinate amount of time trying to cover up for your weaknesses. And what we see in terms of building powerful teams is really finding those complementary pieces. I'm never going to be great at finishing the details, right? Like that last 10-20% of the work, I'm completely disengaged. And so finding people that I can partner with that can kind of help me, more or less cover for those areas of weakness in my life. And once earlier on, maybe you're kind of like, hey, I can overcome this. Yes. But, you just get to a point in your life where you're like, hey, like this isn't going to change, and I need to find somebody to partner with or come alongside me that can help enable that aspect of my life in a way that I wouldn't be able to do on my own. Totally agree.
Yes, right? Because the details, I'm sure there was times in your life where you probably gave yourself a hard time for not being more disciplined about the details. And I should be doing more of this. And it's a lot of energy that can be sucked by trying to go against the grain when there's others who are amazing at that same skill, to your point.
Yep.
Awesome. Great. So this is a big one. So anyone who works with self-discipline knows about creating rituals and habits. So, I love, Jocko, this statement, discipline equals freedom. Like oftentimes we think discipline restricts us, but actually discipline gives us freedom. And one way to do that is to create very specific habits and rituals. So for example, if you wanted to run at 6 o'clock in the morning and you wanted to get into a habit of that, it's like, okay, I set the alarm, then I do this and I lay my clothes out. Like, what are the habits or things you put in place that make you not have to work so hard to do the thing, right? They just become more natural, because once we have habits, it makes it much easier to stay focused on something.
Yeah, one of the things that we quote a lot in the work that we do is McKinsey did a leadership study a few years ago. It talked about specifically leadership or executive development. And what they did is they looked at how many opportunities does someone need to practice something before they become proficient at it. And what they found is it took as many as 30 to 40 different opportunities to practice something to get to a level of proficiency. And really what we're talking about is no different here, right? You have to have that repetition or that practice. You have to find ways to build it into your normal rhythms, or else the inertia of that is just so much harder to overcome. And so finding ways, and again, like another great example of where Cloverleaf has taken that concept and really just kind of embedded it, because sending coaching insights about the people that you're meeting with or the people that you're on a team with, like when you see that enough times, you don't have to spend the mental energy to process that. It actually is just kind of innate.
Yes.
And your relationships go to a new place, right? The work that you're doing, or the ability to lose weight, or the ability to be more productive at work, it just feels natural. And you don't have to burn all that extra like mental calories to get there.
It's true. And I think about the coaching tips, right? Once you've seen it enough times, then you also go to a meeting and you might not know how to work with someone, but your habit goes, oh, I should figure out how to work with them before I go meet with them.
That's
right? Like it just becomes part of your nature. So I love that. And we talked about this earlier. Willpower is a finite resource, right? They've done research on, by the end of the day, you have less willpower. So the more rituals and habits that you can create to be effective at something, the less you have to use that brain power on things that are unimportant.
I love it.
I love that study. Thank you for that. I need to go look it up.
I can send it to you. I have a
That would be
PDF.
awesome.
Maybe we'll include it in the video notes as well.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd love to see it. All right. We all know the legendary time management expert, author, Stephen Covey, put the big rocks in first, right? So the concept here is that, and it goes back to willpower being a limited resource, right? If you're trying to be disciplined about things, don't wait to do the hardest things at the end because they won't fit in. You won't have enough energy or time or resource. So again, with big rocks in first, if you haven't learned this theory, and we can put the link to actually the Jim Rohn video on this because it's really good, but this idea that when you put the big rocks in first, the most important things first, then everything else can fit around it. But if you try to be disciplined and put the big rocks in last, or don't do the important things, they never fit in, right? There's just not enough time for them. So the self-discipline of what do I start my day with? How do I get momentum? What's most important to accomplish here? Writing down 3 things. If I only did these 3 things today, what would be the most important things for me to do today? So there's just this idea of be disciplined about doing the most important things first.
And one way to think about this too, from a workplace perspective, is prioritization, because
Yes.
you prioritize those things that are most important and most meaningful. And it really wasn't until I started walking first thing in the morning, like making that a priority. It's like, hey, the alarm goes off. It's like, get yourself ready to get out the door. That it actually did get done, right? So it applies to all areas of life, but for sure, love it.
Well, it's interesting you said that within organizations, because one of the biggest things at a senior leadership level that I hear is people want to spend more time on strategy, right? Like they're constantly in fires and putting things out and like dealing with all the stuff. And, it would be the not urgent, important stuff, right? Or sorry, the urgent stuff that's important, or the urgent, not important, but it just comes real fast. But the not urgent, important stuff gets left behind, and this time for strategy. And so many leaders I work with say, I wish I had more time to just strategically think about things so I could be more thoughtful and less reactive with how I'm working, with my strategy, with my people. And so there's a big focus about how do you block that time out, but it's not easy, and it takes a lot of discipline to not jump into your email first thing and put out fires, as opposed to going, where do I spend my time on strategy here?
Yeah, it's funny too, because I give this advice to my team regularly when they talk about, not having enough time for something, because it's like, if that is important, just block it out on your calendar, right? Like put an hour or 2 hours, on your calendar every week. And like, we know that like you're going to blow through that on some weeks, right? Like something happens, there's an important client meeting, and like, hey, that's going to fall off that week. But putting it on the calendar significantly increases the chances that it's actually going to get done. So like, that's been a good tool for me personally. And I think it's been very helpful for our team as well.
I think it is. I think it's a great strategy, and it goes back to the discipline of doing it, right? Which in some cases goes back to that environmental of like, turn my cell phone off, turn my email off, turn my notifications off, turn everything off so I can focus, go into a conference room. That wouldn't be hard right now, although there's people are probably having a really hard time finding any space if you have children at home like we do.
That's true.
But how do you make sure the environment allows for the strategy time too?
That's right.
Work from home. I work with a lot of people who, before all this happened, was their strategy for strategy time was blocking it on their calendar at home and not going into work till noon on a Friday to get that done.
That's great.
Awesome. Last strategy, Darren, be nice to yourself. So I think with self-discipline, even the word discipline implies so much like strictness or willpower or whatever, the words you want to use for it. Self-control. But be nice to yourself. Like change is hard and new habits are hard, and our minds are wired for familiarity. And I see way too often that people commit to something and then beat themselves up for not doing it well enough, right? And you see this a lot in lots of areas of life. Health and fitness come up a lot, right? With self-discipline, it's probably the most common thing. I think there's a lot of things that happen around work situations too, but health and fitness. And I'll never forget, I was working with a client and she wanted to start working out more, right? So her goal was to work out 5 days a week. And we met like 2 weeks later. We had a couple conversations, but we met, it was 2 weeks after she had set her goal, and she was like, I didn't do it. And I was like, what? And she goes, so mad at myself. I wasn't disciplined enough, to follow through. And I didn't work out 5 days this week. And I was like, well, how many days did you work out? And she said, 3. I was like, how many days did you work out the week before that? She's like, 0. And the week before that, 0. And the week before that, maybe 1 or 2. I'm like, okay, so how do you acknowledge your wins and successes along the way instead of constantly kind of beating yourself up for what you're not doing? And I'm a big fan of making sure you acknowledge and celebrate your wins, even if they're small, because that then allows your brain to continue to get momentum as opposed to going, can't do this, sorry, not disciplined enough, right? So how do you be nice to yourself and acknowledge those successes?
I feel like oftentimes too, when I see people who are disappointed in those outcomes, a lot of it stems from just like not being able to say no to things. And, like,
Yeah.
I think they would appreciate the things that they are accomplishing in their life if they just said that, like, hey, I'm okay saying no to some of these other areas, right? But I think we get so much into the whole FOMO, like I want to do everything, and like a lot of the messages are telling us that we can do everything too. And that's been really, like, I think the be nice to yourself piece that I think about on this too is that,
Yeah.
like, be nice to yourself in terms of like not trying to take on the world, like let's just, let's prioritize those things. Let's focus on the ones that we can accomplish in the short time period, that are important to what we want our life to be. So that I kind of, I don't know, it's not exactly what you're saying
I
here, but
love
like I think there's
it.
an element to it.
No, I love it because it also goes to the element of, like, when you thought back to when we first started, is which of the areas of my life do I need more discipline? Like, maybe you just need to let go of it, right? Like maybe there's an area you've been beating yourself up for, like where you just need to say, like, I don't even need that. I can say no to that, right? I don't need to be more disciplined. I just need to take that away from my life. I don't need to keep it hanging over me. So I
Yeah.
love that, Darren. I think it's really important.
And that in and of itself is discipline, right? Like it's hard to be disciplined to say no. I mean, I know I overextend myself a lot, not in our current circumstances, but I think especially, when we could meet face to face and we could just do a coffee with someone, or we could just, like I would say yes to way more things than right now. This current kind of quarantine situation has really forced a level of discipline around that I'm super thankful for, because it's allowed me to see, hey, what kind of fruits can you experience when you are able to say no, right? Or when there's not as much competing for your time and attention. So hopefully that's a way people can be nice to themselves too. So
I think that's huge. I think that's a huge discipline to be able to say no. Just like, I love it. I'm glad you added that. I think it's awesome.
anything else, Tracy? This has been great. Hopefully, somebody takes a couple of little tips or insights. Hopefully they wrote down at the beginning of this, video, what's one area that they really want to focus in on, and hopefully they picked up 2 or 3 things along this video that they can implement today. Any last minute thoughts before we sign off here?
I would just say, and have a little slide for it, pause and reflect. Our lives are busy. You're moving on to the next thing. You watch this video, you're off and running. Like, take a minute, as you just said, Darren, and think back about which thing you want to be more disciplined on. Think about which of these strategies might work to try. And then just take a moment to identify what might get in your way, because there's a deeper level here about self-discipline that we didn't talk about, that is more about, you intend to do something and then there's something else getting in the way. So I would just pause and reflect for things that aren't working, where you've tried all this, is just really asking yourself, what's getting in my way? Is it a belief? Is it something about my identity? Is it something that I really just shouldn't be doing this? Like, really take the moment to pause and reflect, as opposed to just trying to push forward and be more of something. It might not be relevant or important in that situation.
That's awesome.
So I hope this was helpful. It was fun talking to you about it and hearing all the different examples too from you.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for taking the time to jump on this recording. And hey, if people want to connect with you, how do they do that?
So you can go to tracykennedy.com, just head over to my website, and there's a place to contact me on there. And I'd love to hear from anyone, love to be of support. On the website, there's a blog, there's tons of resources on all sorts of personal and professional growth and development topics. So a bunch of free guides on different things about energy, or how to be at your best, or how to figure out your next step. But there's a lot of resources on the site that might be helpful to people too.
Cool. And we'll include some links in the video notes as well. And then obviously they can go to cloverleaf.me if they want, back to your point about pause and reflect, really kind of creating that self-awareness. And obviously Cloverleaf has a lot of resources and assessments that people can take to understand a little bit more about how they're naturally wired to work, and hopefully kind of find those areas and those rhythms and routines that work for them. So this has been awesome. Thanks so much, Tracy.
My pleasure. Thank you, Darren.